Welcome to the channel Learn with Danish. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. Good morning everybody. This video is for the students of 5th semester BA English Language and Literature affiliated to the University of Calicut. In this video, I would be talking of a portion from the paper that's titled as Methodology of Literature. It's a paper that has a vivid range of subjects in it, starting with the canons of literature, the British canon, the African canon, American, and all these different historical details of English literature, as well as it also constitutes the different theoretical schools and criticism, and gives a basic introduction to these theory and criticism, that is the approaches in analyzing literature. In this video, I would be focusing on textual approaches, starting with the school of criticism, which is known as New Criticism. Basically, my way of delivering this lecture would be based on 4 elements. The first element that I would be focusing on would be related to the background context of the concerned literary criticism. That is how it emerged. What are the reasons behind its emergence? The second element would be mentioning certain major critics associated with that particular school of criticism. The third element would be based on giving you a basic general feature of that particular school of criticism. And the fourth would be dealt with the different terminologies that each analytical school takes up in their own perspective. Different terminologies. We have different terminologies for different school of criticism. Maybe these terminologies would differ in a very slight manner. So now let's start off with the textual approach. So literature as such has got different ways of analysis. When we talk of literature, there are many analytical viewpoints with concerning literature. We see that literature was basically humanistic. That is, literature was analyzed for the general benefit of humanity. The moral aspects of literature was analyzed. Slowly, different kinds of approaches came into the analysis of literature, such as textual approaches. Then you have the sociological approaches, and then psychological approaches. So I would be focusing here mainly on textual approach. As you can come in terms with the word itself, the textual approach deals with the analysis of literature in the textual perspective. So every literature that we consider should be considered as a text, and within this text we have different kinds of analysis and different kinds of schools of criticism. Now let's just go into the topic that we are planning to discuss today. It is New Criticism. Basically, talking about New Criticism, it is an American school of criticism. Usually this mode of literary theory and criticism either belong to the American school of criticism or the European school of criticism. So you should be able to relate each school as to which part of the world do they belong to. So New Criticism is an American school of criticism, and it was a reaction against the general prevalent mode of historical analysis of literature. So it emerged after the 1930s in America, maybe to be precise after 1940s in America. We see that it had a great influence in the European counterpart also. We'll come to that. So it's an American school of criticism, and before the 1930s, we see that American mode of analyzing literature was basically done on the perspective of the historical analysis of the text. So either we just focused on the biography of the author, right? biography of the author or the age in which the text is written, and we analyze the literature based on these two principal analysis. So that was the major kind of analysis before 1940s in American academia when analyzing literature. So as a reaction to this, I'm not saying that this is the only perspective in which literature was analyzed. This was the main perspective of analysis just before new criticism emerged. So the word new criticism was actually coined by the American critic John Crowe Ransom in his work titled with the same name, New Criticism. And it got its ideas from European critics like I.A. Richards and T.S. Eliot. Both are very, very famous critic of formalist approach of criticism, because I.A. Richards was a professor at the Cambridge University. At I.A. Richards, when he comes to the university to teach poetry, we see that he gives to his students different anonymous poems for them to analyze. So he considers text to be the most important factor in analyzing literature. Literature is basically the text as such for I.A. Richards as well as T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, who is the author of The Wasteland, which is a heap of broken images, which is considered to be one of the major modern poem of the century. We see that in his essay also, Tradition and Individual Talent, he stresses on the poem per se concept, poem for its own sake concept. So there are two major works written by I.A. Richards. One is a collection of his lectures, that is Practical Criticism. Then we have Principles of Literary Criticism in the year 1923. So this is the general background of what new criticism is all about. Now the major critics, I'll just mention the names of major critics that revolve around new criticism. They are Glenn Brooks, then Robert Penn Warren, Alan Tate, Wimsatt and Beardsley. I'll not be discussing the whole bunch of critics in detail, but some of them, of course. Next, we would be focusing on the general features of new criticism. New criticism have basically four general features. Now, what are these four features? The first one is a poem should be self-sufficient. The new critic analyzes poem to be in its own self or in its own whole as such. The second one is literature has a special kind of language and is different from the language of sciences. So science language is different from the language of literature. It is quite ornamentative. It has got figurative usage of language and many figurative usage such as paradox, you have irony, lots of things. The third feature that new critics concentrate on based on their analysis is the distinctive procedure of analysis is explication or close reading of the text. So in the 1920s, we see the French critics who actually propounded this word, explication de texte. Explication de texte in actual terms indicate close reading of the text. They closely read the text. What is inside the text? What does each word mean? The fourth point is there is no significance given to genres in literature because they consider all genres to be just mere play of words. So these are the general features of new criticism. Now, coming to the different terminologies that is associated with the school of new criticism. The first terminology is affective fallacy. Affective fallacy was coined by W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe C. Beardsley, the two mentioned critics earlier. And they have written an essay in their work Verbal Icon, which was published in the year 1954 with the same name, Affective Fallacy. Now, fallacy, what does fallacy mean? Fallacy means error, right? It's mistake. So, what does affective fallacy signify? Affective fallacy signifies the error of evaluating the text based on the emotional impacts of the reader. So, we see that certain texts are analyzed or are criticized based on the impact it makes on the reader. For example, a kind of subjective criticism. So subjective criticism is actually a kind of error in criticism, according to W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley. So he says that there is an error in analyzing literature when you analyze literature based on the impact it has made upon the readers. So this particular kind of fallacy was a reaction against Impressionism that prevailed during that time, which gave prime importance to emotional analysis of readers. Impressionism is basically associated with painting, where the artist is not into the picture, but rather the mind of the individual who is seeing the painting creates an impression of its own kind, creates an interpretative of its own kind. That is what is known as Impressionism. What comes into the mind when you look at the painting, that is impressionistic criticism. So it's a reaction against. So as I said earlier, the whole concept is not just purely a reaction against the historical analysis, but also with certain minor schools like Impressionism too. So affective fallacy, I hope you have understood that terminology. There is another terminology that these two critics again mentions in their work, that is intentional fallacy. Again, an error that is caused in the analysis of literature. It was again coined by these two critics, W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley, in the same book itself, Verbal Icon, 1954, with the same titled essay in intentional fallacy. Now, what is the intentional fallacy? It is the error of analyzing a text based on the author's intended meaning. So affective indicates the error of analyzing the text based on the reader's mind, but intentional fallacy indicate the error of analyzing the text based on the author's intended meaning. So the first one focuses on the reader. The second fallacy, that is the intentional fallacy, focuses on the author's intended meaning. So when we analyze literature based on what the author actually meant, is actually a kind of not evaluating or not analyzing literature to the most fullest of its term, according to these two critics. The text is the primary source of concern for these two critics, especially new criticism as such. Text is the primary source of criticism. That is the two terminologies associated with Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley. Then we have another term which is quite oftenly seen in literature, that is paradox. You might be aware about the latest book by Shashi Tharoor, The Paradoxical Prime Minister. Now, what is a paradox? A paradox is a kind of figurative language that is used in literature, and it is a statement that is confused or contradictory or absurd in logic but is interpretable. So actually the statement is absurd. When you come across a statement that's absurd but it can be interpreted. This paradox was primarily used by writers of the 17th century in England, that is the metaphysical writers. The metaphysical writers like John Donne had actually exploited the use of this paradox. And this analysis of paradox in literature is basically seen as a trend by new critics in analyzing literature. They focus on the different paradox that is available in a text, and they analyze the meaning of the text based on these paradoxes. right? Rather than focusing on the intended meaning or the impressionistic meaning of the reader, they focus on the paradoxes as such. The example that John Donne has written, "Death, thou shalt die," is a statement that's made by Donne in his poems. So we have many canonization, validation, formula, many poems written by John Donne which had exploited paradox. One example is what I have given you over here. The fourth term that's associated with new criticism is irony. Right. Irony, there are many different kinds of irony. I know you know what irony is all about. You might have heard this before, heard about this word before. But still, in order to brush up your knowledge, irony is a device used to convey a difference of opinion or difference of the intended meaning towards the actual meaning of the words in the text. So there is an intended meaning inside an actual wordings inside the text. If there is an actual wording, "Oh, you are great," it can mean that you are good for nothing. "Oh, you are great," it does not literally mean just you are great. It also can mean, with the intonation procedures, it also can mean that there is some problem with your greatness, or you are good for nothing, right? So certain sentences can mean differently. That is irony. It's taken up from the Greek character called iron, which is actually a character which has a light kind of appearance, but is considered to be one of the most important characters in Greek plays, iron. And there are many kinds of irony, but we are not going to focus on every kinds of irony. I'll just mention some of the irony that these new critics focuses on. One is verbal irony. Just like the word goes, it focuses on the word, the interpretation inside the word of a sentence. Then there is situational irony. Situational irony is an irony that adopts through a kind of characterization. We bring in, or the author tries to bring in a characterization into the text, or character into the text, in order to create a kind of double meaning or kind of ironical statement of the author through the text. Right. Then the third one is sarcasm. Sarcasm is actually a kind of a rough irony, wherein you just bluntly attack whatever is intended to be attacked. Right. So irony is another term that's associated with new criticism. The last term that we would be focusing on is tension. Tension is associated with a new critic, Alan Tate. Right. It's a term that's associated with Alan Tate. And he actually, what is tension? Tension is actually a word that is derived by Alan Tate by lopping out the prefixes of the two words extension and intention in linguistics. Now, what is extension and intention in linguistics? It's not the extension that means the extended factor like thing. Certain terminologies might be there in different kinds of academia, but here in linguistics, intention is actually the abstract idea of a particular word. I'll just give you a small example. For example, if I say the word crown, it has got some relationship with the collective unconscious also. It has got something relationship with you can just relate it like that. Abstract meaning in the sense, for example, crown can give an abstract meaning of power. It can give an abstract meaning of kingship. It can give an abstract meaning of, but that doesn't mean the exact terminology as such, or the word as such. Right. So intention is actually the abstract meaning of the word, and extension in linguistic means the concrete meaning of that particular word. For example, crown, kiridam, is the exact concrete meaning of that particular word. So Alan Tate actually tried to bring in a kind of equilibrium between extension and intention. When you analyze a text, you should not just focus focus on extension, or you should not just focus on intention. There should be an equilibrium based on the textual analysis, that is tension. So ex and in is actually removed and one word is given. It's a combination of extension and intention in word. So Tate opines that a good poem clearly states out a kind of well-organized extension and intention of a word. It is the equilibrium of the serious and the ironical aspect of poetry, right? So there is a kind of equilibrium that's brought in due to the concept of tension. With this, we come to the end of New Criticism. I hope you have understood a basic idea about the School of New Criticism. If you have any doubts, you can drop in your doubts in your comment box or suggestions at the comment box given below. Till then, it's me, Danish, signing off for the next video. Have a nice day. Learn with Danish.